Everybody, welcome to another video. It's your boy Jerry and Mouse, and today we are diving deeper into the power of awareness. Today is chapter 7. It is attitude. Now, in today's chapter, we're going to really discuss inner conversations and what it means to have that controlled imagination and attitude awareness. Talking about uncritical observation, and also we even get to touch on this whole idea of everyone is yourself pushed out. In other words, everyone is reflecting what you yourself are holding on to in consciousness. And they're essentially playing their part perfectly to match what you got going on. So, leading up to this chapter, right? We've talked about the I am, your true self. I am, that part of yourself, right? And how this I am is actually consciousness, your awareness. And with your awareness, we have a power of assumption. And we come to realize that what we consent to as true about ourselves and the world will be reflected in the screen of space, and that if we want to change, we have a desire. So things happen in this world, and it springs a desire within us, which springs the wellspring of action in all of us. And then we talked about the truth that sets us free, which is again I am, and again recognizing that this game that we are playing is about attitude awareness and imaginal control, which then brought us into attention. So this is how we control our imagination. This is how we have awareness of our attitude is with attention, what we have focused in on. Okay, and what we're focused in on becomes our attitude, and that's what we're going to talk about today. How to have that uncritical observation so we are aware of what our attitude is. All right. So this is a little bit of a longer chapter in comparison to most of Neville's chapters in this book, but we'll get into it because he shares a bit of a story in this one to help elucidate the idea. Um, so let's dive right into it. All right. So, Power of Awareness, Chapter 7, Attitude. Experiments recently conducted by Merle Lawrence at Princeton and Aldebert Ames at Dartmouth in the latter psychology laboratory in Hanover, New Hampshire, um, prove that you see you see when you look at something depends not so much on what is there as on the assumptions you make when you look. Since what we believe to be real, physical, since what we believe to be the real physical world is actually only an assumptive world, it is not surprising that these experiments prove that whatever appears to be solid reality is actually the result of expectations or assumptions. Your assumptions determine not only what you see, but also what you do, for they govern all your conscious and subconscious movements towards the fulfillment of themselves. Over a century ago, this truth was stated by Emerson as follows: As the world was plastic and fluid in the hands of God, so it is ever to so much of his attributes as we bring to it. The ignorance and sin, it is flint. They adapt themselves to it as they may, but in proportion as man has anything in him divine, the firmament flows before him and takes his signet and form. Your assumption is the hand of God, molding the firmament into the image of that which you assume. The assumption of the wish fulfilled in is the high tide which lifts you easily off the bar and senses where you have long lain stranded. It lifts the mind into prophecy in the full right sense of the word. And if you have a controlled imagination and an absorbed attention, which it is possible to attain, you may be sure that all your assumptions implies will come to pass. When William Blake wrote, "What seems to be is to those to whom it seems to be," he was only repeating the eternal truth. There is nothing unclean of itself, but to him that esteemeth anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. Romans 14:14. Because there is nothing unclean of itself or clean of itself, you should assume the best and think of that which is lovely and of good report. It is not superior insight, but ignorance of the law of assumption. If you read into the greatness of men some littleness with which you may be familiar, or into some situation or circumstance of unfavorable conviction, your particular relationship to another influences your assumption with respect to that other and makes you see in him that which you do see. If you can change your opinion of another, then what you now believe of him cannot be absolutely true, but is only relatively true. The following is an actual case history illustrating how the law of assumption works. One day, a costume designer described to me her difficulties in working with a prominent theatrical producer. She was convinced that he was unjustly criticized and rejected her best work, and that often he was deliberately rude and unfair to her. Upon hearing her story, I explained that if she found the other rude and unfair, it was a sure sign that she herself was wanting, and that it was not the producer, but herself that was in need of a new attitude. I told her that the power of this law of assumption and its practical application could be discovered only through experience, and that only by assuming that the situation was already what she wanted it to be could she prove that she could bring about the change desired. Her employer was merely bearing witness, telling her by his behavior what her concept of him was. I suggested that it was quite probable that she was carrying on conversations with him in her mind which were filled with criticism and recriminations. There was no doubt but that she was mentally arguing with the producer, for others only echo which we whisper to them in secret. I asked her if it was not true that she talked to him mentally, and if so, what those conversations were like. She confessed that every morning on her way to the theater, she told him just what she thought of him in a way she would never have dared address him in person. The intensity and force of her mental arguments with him automatically established his behavior towards her. She began to realize that all of us carry on mental conversations, but unfortunately, on most occasions, these conversations are argumentative, that we have only to observe the passerby on the street to prove this assertion, that so many people are mentally engrossed in conversation and few appear to be happy about it. But the very intensity of their feeling must lead them quickly to the unpleasant incident they themselves have mentally created and therefore must now encounter. When she realized what she had been doing, she agreed to change her attitude and to live this law faithfully by assuming that her job was highly satisfactory and her relationship with the producer was a very happy one. To do this, she agreed that before going to sleep at night, on her way to work, and at other intervals during the day, she would imagine that he had congratulated her on her fine designs, and that she, in turn, had thanked him for his praise and kindness. To her great delight, she soon discovered for herself that her own attitude was the cause of all that befell her. The behavior of her employer miraculously reversed itself, his attitude echoing as it had always done that which she had assumed now reflected her changed concept of him. What she did was by the power of imagination. Her persistent assumption influenced her behavior and determined his attitude towards her. With the passport of desire on the wings of a controlled imagination, she traveled into the future of her own predetermined experience. Thus, we see it as not facts, but that which we create in our imagination, which shapes our lives. For most of us, for most of the conflicts of the day are due to the want of a little imagination to cast the beam out of our own eye. It is the exact and literal minded who live in a fictitious world. As the designer, by her controlled imagination, started the subtle change in her employer's mind, so can we, by the control of our own imagination and wisely directed feeling, solve our problems. By the intensity of her imagination and feeling, the designer cast a kind of enchantment on her producer's mind and caused him to think that his generous praise originated with him. Often our most elaborate and original thoughts are determined by another. We should never be certain that it was not some woman treading in the winepress who began the subtle change in men's mind, or that the passion did not begin in the mind of some shepherd boy, lighting up his eyes for a moment before he ran upon its ways. William Butler Yeats. So, attention, attitude, inner conversations, mental diets, all these things are all wrapped up in this chapter. You see, if you're listening to this, and you're listening to this as you are already the man or the woman that you want to be, you'll understand what this is saying. This woman who was working in the shop had an inner conversation where she's telling off her boss. Have you ever done that before? Have you ever told somebody off and you're just having an argument in your head and you're saying stuff that you would never say to this person? Excuse me. Have you ever come across that? Saying things that you would never say to somebody in their face within yourself? Perhaps you say stuff about yourself to yourself that you would never actually say to another person. You'll say it to yourself, but you would never say it out loud because you'd be embarrassed or you'd be ashamed of yourself. But you say it anyways within your imagination. And only God knows, God knows what he's working on as far as like being a potter and working at the wheel. So really, what this boils down to is recognizing that whatever is showing up in this 3D world, you are making an assumption. And you make an assumption and you make an assumption and you make an assumption and it hardens into fact. And then you wonder why these things keep happening to you. It's only because you accepted something as true. But as soon as you change that program, change that story, change whatever it is that you have going on in your mind, and you persist in that change, it will reflect itself in the outer world. So, your relationship with whomever, whether it's your boss in this woman's case, or your spouse, your doctor, your accountant, whomever, whoever it is that you're having a conversation with within your head, like, oh, I'm not enough, I don't have this, I can't have that, these people treat me like crap, whatever it is, change that conversation. You have to change that conversation. That's your only option. That's the only power we have. The only power we have to see a change in this world is by imagining something different. So tomorrow's chapter, we're actually going to talk about renunciation, which essentially is revision. He calls it renunciation, which is fine. And if if leading up to today, 7 days of reading the power of awareness, if leading up to today, you've been practicing listening to this from the state of the wish fulfilled, you're going to love next chapter. If you haven't been doing this work, that's fine too. You'll still love the next chapter, but we'll really start putting all of this work to the test. And this next chapter is when we really start playing with the power of awareness. So I'm hoping that you're enjoying what I have going on right now. If you have any questions or comments, please, put them down in the comment section down below. Make sure you like and subscribe, and let me know if this is serving you, and if it's not serving you, in what ways can I serve you. Go ahead, you guys. You guys are awesome. Y'all stay wonderful out there. Peace and hair grease.